Welcome to a brand new edition of Budget Bulletin. I'm Ashesha Adwaryu, and on the show we have a whole host of things lined up. But after a slow start in the first half of the financial year, the government is now racing to expedite capital spending and enhance different ministries to identify critical infra projects that can be accelerated. Prakash Priyadarshi, my colleague, filed this report earlier in the day. Take a look.
Yes, sir. We are learning from our sources that the government has asked various ministries to expedite spending on key infrastructure projects. In fact, we are given to understand that the key ministries such as railways, road transport and highways, telecom, power, coal and housing affairs have been instructed to accelerate capital spending on key infrastructure projects. In fact, the government has reviewed over 1,700 central sector infrastructure projects. Various ministries have been instructed to identify projects that can boost capital spending. In addition to that, we are also learning from our sources that the Finance Ministry has completed consultation with the ministries on budget estimates for FY26, and it has been observed that the government spending needs to increase by more than 45% to meet FY25 capital expenditure target. Along with that, the government has also observed that the Capex will reach 90 to 95% of the total target during FY25. However, this will be higher than the last year's spending in absolute terms. Sources are also confirming that a modest increase in capital expenditure is likely in capital expenditure target for FY26.
And to discuss this in further detail, we now have Gaurav Sengupta, Chief Economist at IDFC First Bank, now joining us. Gaurav, thank you so much for taking your time out and speaking with us. And since we are on the topic of Capex and budget is round the corner, we just heard Prakash talk about government's focus on Capex this year. What are you penciling in with respect to Capex? And within Capex, which are those sub-segments that you think government will focus on?
So we are a little less optimistic than the government. So for us, we feel that in FY25 they'll reach around 9.6 trillion. Target for Capex is 11.1. Currently, till November, the government of India, the capital expenditure is down by around 12%. So they really need to ramp up to get anywhere close to target. So we feel that the shortfall could be somewhere around 1.5 trillion from the target. Focus areas, if you see the ministry-wise expenditure, there has been a slight slowdown for roads, railways on track, housing is broadly in line. I think going forward for FY26, we would expect that the Capex target for FY25 that they had originally set for around 11.1, at least at minimum 11.1 trillion rupees should be the capital expenditure target, if not higher for FY26. And the focus should be, apart from road, railways, also urban infrastructure, especially the real estate sector, which has a lot of multipliers, would be a good allocation for FY26.
Real estate are some of the sub-sectors you believe the government should focus on. But my next question is on consumption, which has clearly slowed down over the last couple of years. Do you believe this is a structural slowdown, and what kind of measures do you expect from the government to boost consumption?
It's not a structural slowdown, it's a cyclical slowdown. So what's happening in the urban sector is you've seen a slowdown in corporate profits. And the slowdown in corporate profits is because sales growth slowed down it started from the second half of FY24 and it's intensified in FY25. And as a result, the urban wage growth has also moderated. And this is now getting reflected in urban sector consumption indicators. So I would say, not a structural slowdown. We have a strong positive demographic dividend. We have a expanding formal sector economy. So the urban consumption trend, the softness that we are seeing in the near term, it's a function of urban wage growth, which has slowed a bit. So once growth conditions improve, especially domestically as well as externally, right now the growth conditions are a bit challenging, both domestically as well as externally. So that's what the urban slowdown is reflecting. So once growth picks up globally as well as domestically, company profits improve, you will see a pickup in urban wage growth and urban consumption.
As far as urban consumption is concerned, but for India to grow at more than 8%, what will the key, growth drivers be where the government or the policy support should come in for?
I think the main thing that the government can do is focus on Capex. It's very important that the central government spends on Capex. It's also important that they incentivize states. So states and is roughly 50-50 in terms of share of overall government expenditure. So what's happening right now is both center and states are not spending in Capex. Center capital expenditure is down by 12%, states is down by around 7%. So they have to focus on not just ensuring that the center spends, but also ensuring that the state governments in FY26 again restart focusing on expenditure. We start seeing those 15 to 20% increase in capex that we saw last year, both at the center and state level. And that will result in employment creation and that will boost consumption. I would say capital expenditure is a much stronger way to boost consumption rather than even an income tax cut, though it will be a good measure in the interim. But the reach of an income tax cut is limited because the number of people that pay taxes are actually is a very small proportion of the population, while especially the direct tax. But in the case of capex, that has a much stronger growth multiplier. It can create that whole income job creation, which leads to income creation, and it in turn will support a sustainable pickup in consumption.
Taking a leaf from what you just said, one of course is with respect to rural support and second income tax. Do you expect any rate cuts for the middle income class? And second, what kind of policy support do you expect for rural India?
So I think the good part for rural, at least in this year, is the fact that we'll be having a good Kharif as well as Rabi output, and that should support rural. I think the important part is the government continues to support rural job creation, rural housing. But for the urban side, again, there is an expectation that you could see income tax cut at the lower income levels. For now, we are not penciling that in our estimates. We would rather have that space of fiscal to be utilized more on capex, because the more the tax is cut on the income side, the capex can get constrained. So whatever is the spare fiscal space after boosting capex should be used for giving an income tax cut at the lower tax brackets, because it's really the middle part of consumption which has got affected, while you see the luxury consumption that is still growing pretty strong.
Do you expect government's focus on fiscal discipline to continue for the next couple of years?
Fiscal discipline is something that they have outperformed. If you look at India compared to other EMs, post COVID, we have actually reduced our fiscal deficit significantly. We've come down from peak levels of almost 9% fiscal deficit to currently the target for FY25 is 4.9%. Our estimate is the fiscal deficit could be 4.7%. So compared to emerging markets, we've done a fantastic job, because if you see overall, emerging market fiscal deficit has actually picked up post-COVID, while India has moderated, or it has consolidated at a very aggressive pace. So going forward, we would recommend, at least at the center level, that the pace of fiscal consolidation slows down. So for FY26, we do expect that the target is retained at 4.5. Our expectation for FY25 is that they will outperform. Instead of 4.9 fiscal deficit of GDP, it's likely to be at around 4.7% of GDP. So even if they do outperform for FY25, we would suggest that they don't further, revise down the fiscal deficit target for FY26, maintain it at 4.5. Whatever fiscal space opens up should be utilized to support growth, in particular capex. We are also going to look forward to what they indicate for the medium-term consolidation plan, because from FY27 onwards, the government has indicated that they're going to start targeting government debt to GDP. So we instead of the fiscal deficit. So what targeting government debt to GDP gives you a flexibility that you can actually go for a slower pace of fiscal deficit consolidation, because as per our calculations, from FY27 onwards, a smaller, let's say a 0.2% of GDP decline for next couple of years will still give you a reduction in the government debt to GDP profile. A gradual reduction, but a reduction nonetheless. And given the fact that we're a developing economy and creating growth is also extremely important, we would suggest, at least at the center level, that post FI from FY27 onwards, the pace of fiscal consolidation be slowed down.
Coming in as far as fiscal consolidation is concerned, Gaurav, thank you so much for taking your time out and helping us understand what the expectations should be from the upcoming budget. But as we wind down on this edition of Budget Bulletin, what is the retail space looking at for the upcoming budget? We spoke to Yatin Sharma, the Senior Manager of Finance at Adidas India Marketing, for their expectations from the upcoming budget. Let's listen in.
From retail perspective, the main concerns and most important worry is an ongoing slowdown in retail sector from past many quarters. And our only expectation from the upcoming budget is to see some incentives and revenues from government, which increases the turnouts of consumer in the market. This could be anything from the expectation point of view, like reduction of personal income tax, which eventually increases the purchasing power in hands of consumer, and they actually turn out into the markets. Reducing rate of interest on loans, GST rates reduction, or schemes for availing deduction on market spends, like we did at COVID times. On the other hand, since we are also coming from a footwear industry is also largely affected due to the recent BIS norms. And the process of getting BIS certification is very slow. So need some push from the government side on the expediting process, and also some incentives and revenues to lift up the footwear industry at large. Other than this, the other expectation from the upcoming budget would be GST rate standardization. It's already in talks. Simplification of Income Tax Act, like removal of dormant sections. Amnesty schemes for clearing old litigations are always welcome, as it releases stress from the industry at large. So these will be our main expectation from the retail standpoint from the upcoming budget.